What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Freedom Stories podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Fury, and on this podcast, we sit down and have amazing conversations with some folks that have some interesting journeys, and we really dive into so many topics, but specifically, we get to the heart of their freedom story. And we get to hear the ways in which God has walked them from so many different challenges maybe in life into freedom and exploring more and more of that freedom as they go in life. And I'm excited to really introduce you guys to somebody who I've come to know more and more in the past year or two, but he's an amazing man of God and somebody who's doing great things in my area, in the Chicagoland area. We're just going to get him on here before I say too much without him. Let's go ahead and get my brother, Daniel Yang, on to the podcast. Daniel, say hello to the folks.
Hey, man. Good to be on, and hello to everybody listening and watching.
Yeah. Y'all, he's somebody, and I didn't tell him I was going to say all this, but he's had a very pivotal role in just the early goings of the ministry at Unshackled Network here. One thing, just even encouraging by asking questions of us. That in itself, and I think that speaks to the book that we'll even get into a bit later. But just the fact that in so many contexts that I've been in throughout all my years, not that it's been so many, but working in the church, I've always been positioned as the learner, and I still love that. But it was really nice to see somebody that I would look to as another amazing leader looking to me to learn from me, and like that was really encouraging. And then, brother, you've been one who's I don't know, whatever ways in which God uses you has put us in different situations that have just been an amazing blessing to us. So I'm grateful to know you. I feel like the Lord just said, hey, I think you should get to know this guy because I'm going to bless you mightily through him. So I'm so appreciative of you, my friend.
Yeah, man. I'm going to exchange the pleasantries and yeah, you're right. I mean, early on when we started the Prodigal Network, I asked you a lot of questions about what you all were doing, and I even asked for your articles of incorporation.
Yeah.
So part of it is that, you and I came from traditional ministry backgrounds. And then when we started thinking about how do we start, really empowered communities that reach, kind of segments of society that typically a traditional church wouldn't, then, we both became the learner, and you were ahead of the curve. And so I got to ask you a lot of good questions still. Appreciate you, man.
Oh, no problem, man. I just a little bit, like not too much ahead, which I think has been I don't know, a joy to walk alongside you in the ways that we have, and I can't wait to do more of that. But before we get so much even into what the Lord's using you all through the Prodigal Network and how He's working in your communities there, I want to take it all the way back. Let's get into a little bit of your story as a young man. I remember reading somewhere that I think you said you're the child of immigrants, that your parents immigrated from Thailand. Is that right?
Yep. So
yeah, go ahead.
My parents were from Laos originally, and then there was a war that was fought in Laos at the same time as the war in Vietnam. Later, the war was renamed the Secret War in Laos because the war in Vietnam was televised in the United States, but the one in Laos was not. But America was intervening just as much. And so my parents, my dad and his brothers and others were recruited by the CIA as guerrilla fighters to fight alongside of them against the Pathet Lao, which were the communists. And so when the Americans pulled out in 1975, that left people like my dad, they were stranded. And then they started doing, the communists started doing ethnic cleansing, or, those who were sided with the Americans had to flee. My dad and our family stayed as a part of the resistance in Laos. for about, let's see, for almost 2 years, 75 to about 78, a little bit over 2 years. And then they eventually just said, you know what, we don't think this is going to happen. So they left Laos into Thailand and were refugees for about a year before they came to the United States in 1979.
Wow.
And then I was
And then,
born 3 months. My mom was, I joke around and say I was conceived in a Thailand refugee camp. I was born in the cornfields of Illinois.
yeah, you said that in your book, and that was actually a line that I wrote down. So that's why I
Yeah.
was like, you know what, I got to ask him about Thailand. And by
Yeah.
the way, you guys, I'm referencing his book, and I haven't even introduced it yet. We'll get into it for sure. But it's a book that he co-authored with Eric Costanzo and is it Matthew Sorens? Is that how you
Yep,
pronounce
that's
that?
right. Yep, Matt Sorens. Yep.
And it's called Inalienable, How Marginalized Kingdom Voices Can Help Save the American Church. We're going to get into that quite a bit throughout, but I wanted to mention exactly what I'm referencing as we talk about that. So you said you were raised in a cornfield in Illinois to a degree,
So
but then you also have some time in Detroit.
I did, yeah. So I was born in East Moline, Illinois, which is where you and I are at. It's about maybe 2.5 hours southwest of here, Rock Island, Quad Cities area. But
I
when
went
I
to
was,
Western Illinois, so
yep,
I
that's right.
went to Macomb down there. Yep.
Okay, yeah, right on, man. And then when I was about 8 or 9, my parents moved to Detroit. So most of my growing up years, all my grade school, high school years were spent in Detroit. Went to University of Michigan. My parents,
Go Blue.
yeah, exactly, right.
I was
Yep.
born in Ann Arbor, so
You were? Oh man,
yep,
see,
born in Ann
I'm learning
Arbor,
a lot of stuff about
1978.
you. Yep. So I mean, Detroit's home for me. My dad still lives there. Most of my siblings still live there. And so essentially I grew up in Detroit, although I was born here in Illinois. And if you've seen the movie Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood, it probably came out in 2007, 2008. A lot of the folks in that movie were actually from the church that I grew up at. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah.
Quick random question. So, growing up in Detroit, how did your friends and family in the Detroit area take it when you said, "Forget Michigan State, I'm going to U of M"?
So, we kind of got a house divided type thing going on in my family, because I would say the majority of my siblings and their kids. So I had 2 siblings that went to Michigan State. 3 of their children went to Michigan State. So only me and my niece went to the University of Michigan. So we're kind of like, we're the elites,
Right.
Everybody else, they had to go to the to the B-level school.
I love it.
My niece Mila and I, we ended up going to Michigan, and yeah, man, it was a great time.
Nice. And if I recall from your bio, so at that time you were studying what was it, computer science and software engineering. And so you got your bachelor's in that. Now, we kind of skipped over some things because I do want to talk a little bit about in that growing up, in that being raised in Detroit, and as you're preparing to go off to university, what was your faith experience like? I believe in the book you referenced something that sounded a bit more like a social Christianity or something other than you really experiencing.
Yeah, so I grew up in a predominantly African American neighborhood. I'd say probably my high school was 85-90% African American. Yeah, that's the city of Detroit. I grew up in a part of Detroit that was the zip code is 48205. A very very beautiful community, but a very challenging community. Very not well resourced. I think there were a lot of dynamics that were happening in the city of Detroit. And then you throw on top of that new immigrants, and then your inner city. So there's a lot of complexities. And so for my friends who were Hmong like me that shared the same heritage, there were a couple of different routes. And I would say this would have been in the mid to early to mid 90s is when I was kind of growing up as a teenager. You kind of had
Mhm.
two routes. You either join gangs, because part of it in joining gangs was, it was a level of protection, but it's also a level of belonging.
Yep.
Um, or you did something that was a little bit more social. My thing was, with church.
Mhm.
And our church was out in the suburbs, and so we drive 5 miles up north outside of Detroit to go to church. But it was an immigrant church, an immigrant community, and so church was definitely a place of faith, but it was also a place of like social belonging, because
Mhm.
we didn't have a lot of community spaces as an immigrant community, so church was that for us. And I saw a lot of my friends, close friends, who went the other route and they ended up gang banging, and
Mhm.
just really uh, good friends of mine. And some of them, turned their life around, and some of them lost their lives. And in some ways, I look back in that time of my life, and it's so informative and instructive, because um, I mean, that's really what formed my early years. And then I went off to college, to Ann Arbor. And then eventually my parents moved out, not very far. They did the 3 mile move north. But if anybody's familiar with Detroit, you all have probably heard of 8 Mile.
Right.
And 8 Mile is the dividing line between the city and the suburbs. We were living at 7 Mile. Eventually my parents bought a house at 12 Mile. And so we just kind of moved right outside the city. But
Yeah.
yeah, man, very formative. And church was that thing for me where in some ways, it was a place of belonging, because if it wasn't church, then it would have been gangs.
Mm. So in that time of you experiencing that belonging, um, I know you talk about your 20s, and we'll get into that, about how you were starting to have doubts. Where was there a moment, or a season where you, as a young person, even really started to grab a hold of your faith, or if there's even a moment where you felt like your salvation became real in
Yeah.
in that church? Could you maybe walk us through that, if there is one?
Yeah, there's a couple of distinct moments. I'd say, yeah, I made a decision to follow Jesus at a very young age. I was probably 7. Right around 9 is when I got baptized, and I think those were very genuine decisions. I mean,
Mhm.
at least I didn't feel coerced. I felt like I made a decision on my own. When I was 16, I went to a youth camp, and that was when the love of God began to feel real to me. And I
Mm.
remember that evening, because the person preaching that evening was preaching directly to gang members. And so,
Mm.
this is one of those youth camps where, you get a bunch of gang members that went. And that night, it was a pretty simple, almost kind of like fire and brimstone type sermon.
Mhm.
And he challenged the gang members to give their life to Jesus. And some of them began to respond to, the altar calls when the preacher tells you to come up for prayer.
Right.
And I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, in the first time, as in my life as a Jesus follower, I was thinking to myself, man, like, if God loves these gangbangers, and again, in my head at the time, I had a really weird dichotomy that there's a group of bad people and a group of good people, right? I mean, it was just kind of
Mhm.
what religion teaches you.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
realize that, in a sense, we all needed Jesus, right?
Right.
But it dawned on me that, well, if God loves them, then he must also love me. And, it was
Mm.
simple, but it was profound. And I just remember, for the first time, feeling the love of God at the age of 16. Now,
Mm.
that obviously didn't do away with a lot of some of the struggles that you end up having as you mature
Right.
in your Christian life. But it was a very real moment for me where I felt like, okay, this isn't just religion. This isn't
Mm.
just about going to church. There is a God that personally cares for me and loves me. And, and I felt that for the first time.
Wow. Wow.
Mhm.
That's beautiful. And I love how in that exchange there, like, the intention of the preacher was, I'm talking to these folks.
Yeah.
And like the Lord in that moment was like, And I'm glad you are, because I'm going to use the fact that you're talking to them to reach this guy right here.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, totally.
that's beautiful, man. I love the way that the Lord works, and so many ways that we just don't always even understand in those moments.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
so you're continuing on in your youth, and you're going off to school. Now, I remember reading somewhere that around 24 you started having doubts. So this is in the midst of, now you're grown in a sense, and you've already graduated college, I'm assuming. And are you working as a software engineer at that time?
Yeah, life happened fast for me. So I got married at 19.
Oh wow, yeah, that's
I
fast.
was sophomore in college, or I had just finished my sophomore year. So I married my wife Linda at 19. She moved up
Mhm.
from South Carolina, and then we got a little apartment outside of Ann Arbor in Ypsilanti.
Yeah.
And then we had our first kid at 21, and that was
Mm.
a great thing. Kids having kids, and we didn't have much, but we said that, hey, we were going to build a life around Jesus, even if we didn't know exactly what that meant. And then we also went on welfare for 3 months, which is like
Mm.
one of the best times of our life. I was
Wow.
I was trying to finish college, and Linda was getting ready to have Justin, and I was like, I can't work as I'm trying to finish college. So we went on welfare for 3 months, and then so that the system worked for us.
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, man, got a job, started working in software, was a developer. This is in 2001, so this is right when like the .com was exploding. So all
Mm.
these internet companies were starting up, and so I went to work for a startup in downtown Ann Arbor, and was starting to build a career, and in a sense, living out my American dream,
Right.
especially my parents' American dream as immigrants
Mhm.
that came here with nothing, and here was my opportunity to make good with that. And then eventually, bought a house in the suburbs and bought my dream car, which was a Yukon XL at the time, and uh, at the age of 24, I was very involved in my church at the time as well. I was at that point serving as a worship leader in our church, very close to my pastor, and I started having struggles and doubts in my faith.
Mm.
Questions that I probably had in college, but for whatever reason, they just didn't hit the way that they did at this point in my life. Questions that aren't very like uncommon. I mean, they were
Mm.
common, like the question of evil, the problem of suffering. What about those who have never heard of the name of Jesus? And these things began to kind of bother me, and
Mm.
I began actually asking questions about the validity of the Bible and the
Mm.
existence of God eventually. And when I even went and told my pastor, I'm like, I feel like I'm losing a grip on my faith. And
Mm.
he was like, just keep doing what you're doing, and be honest. And this probably went on for about almost 2 years, and
Mm.
it was Easter of 2004. So I was still a software developer, and I would say I probably spent like a couple hours each day listening to like debates and studying apologetics. And then I stumbled upon a webpage that was curating NT Wright's work. I didn't know who
Mhm.
NT Wright is, and I don't know if your listeners know who NT Wright is as I'm telling the story, but he's one of the leading New Testament professors in the world. At
Yeah.
the time, he was the Bishop of Durham, which made him the third in line in the church in England. And so,
Mhm.
a pretty well respected scholar.
Yeah.
And I had no clue who he was.
At the time, you're like, okay,
Yeah.
you just came
So
across it.
he just had to happen to be writing a lot about the historicity of Jesus. And so I shot him an email. It was the week of Easter, and I had tons of questions, and a lot of them were around the questions that I talked about, and a lot of them were around a few individuals that used to be uh, uh, incredible, well-known ministers and preachers that eventually, gave up their faith.
Mhm.
And um, So I just dropped this bomb on him, and surprisingly, he responded, and
Wow.
he didn't give me a long answer. He gave me about a paragraph. He said that my questions were too big to answer in an email.
Right.
And he said, but you have to ask yourself, either the resurrection happened, and it must mean something, or it didn't happen. That's the resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah.
Or it didn't happen, and you can be on your way. Is a very British response. Um,
I
and,
love the simplicity of it, though,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And again, he didn't answer any of my questions, but what he did for me was he gave me like a peg to kind of just hang some of my questions
Mm,
on. And out of that season, I said to myself, hey, if I'm going to be a Christian, then I'm going to study the Bible. I'm
mm.
going to really just try to understand what the message of the Bible is. And so I wish I would have knew that there was a cheaper route at the time. But so what I decided to do is, at the age of 26, as an engineer, I just said, hey, man, I'm just going to pay my way through seminary. And I enrolled in seminary, not necessarily to become a pastor or a minister, but it was really to try to just understand and know the Bible more. And so probably about a year and a half into it, that's when I started sensing a change in my vocation.
Mm.
Yeah.
So in that is so beautiful to me that you would take the risk, or however you want to the sacrifice. You would have the sacrifice of paying your way through seminary with believing the purpose, like the end result would simply be that you would know more.
Mhm.
Because I think most of the people that are going to universities and seminaries, it's like, to get this degree that will allow me to do XYZ.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's like, so I can just know, have greater knowledge, for like learning for the sake of learning, and like not just scouring the internet for it, which I love doing, and there's plenty of great resources out there, but like
Mhm.
I'm going to sacrifice some money to do this. So that
Yeah.
was dope. One of the things, and I'm really jumping way ahead because it's related to that from your book. Um, I don't remember which one of you guys wrote this. I think it might have been you. So on page 175, and it talked about some of the maybe unintended results that come out of some people's experiences in seminaries. And
Mm.
I think it was you that wrote, we not only graduated from American seminaries, but almost with condescension, felt like we graduated from our immigrant churches and now prepared to serve in white spaces. Admittedly, this also reflects my own experiences and the personal tensions I navigate daily. I think
Mhm.
that was you that wrote that.
Yeah, it was.
And okay. And can you speak to a little bit now, coming out of seminary and like navigating in some of those white spaces? What was that like? What were some of the challenges that were inherent in you being? Forgive me if I pronounce it wrong. Is it simply Hmong? Is that
Yeah,
how you
that's right.
pronounce that?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
The
Monk.
H always throws me, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I try to do more with the word than I need.
No, that's
So,
good, man. Yeah.
so what were some of those experiences, and what were some of the challenges in that season for you?
Yeah, you're getting personal now. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was me in that portion of the book. And what I was getting at there was this dynamic that yeah, it's not just immigrants, but people of color in the Christian world in America, but probably all over, but in America in particular, where I think in our minds there is like a a better version of Christianity, or a more profound version, or a more professional version, or whatever that standard is. That surely what we have is just like junior varsity,
Right. Yeah.
um and it's hard to tell where that line of thinking came from. A part of it is perhaps it's minority dynamics. Um, the other part of it is, in my community, we don't have a lot. We don't have institutions. We don't have governmental leaders. So we don't have a lot of representation.
Mhm.
And so so part of it is, if you're going to go to seminary, then you have to go to like established seminaries that are typically established by in the evangelical world, predominantly white institutions. And I thank God for them. I thank God for my education. I don't want to talk down on the institutions that I were a part of, because I gained so much.
Yeah.
But I think that in going into seminary, like everyone else, but very simple, very unique, and as an immigrant, we thought that there was like we were learning a better way at being a Christian.
Mhm.
We were learning a better way to do church. A more, we might even say sometimes a more biblical way, or there's a more biblical way of preaching. There's a more biblical way of doing discipleship. And so many of us, me included, came out of seminary not just with a more biblical worldview of the church, but perhaps a more Americanized
Mm.
and perhaps even a more like white normalized understanding of church. And embarrassed to say, me and others, we would have looked at our immigrant churches with a little bit of condescension.
Yep.
I have a completely different perspective now, but this is a normative thing that a lot of people experience. And so, I look back on that, and part of me feels sad. Part of me feels
Mhm.
like, I was, the churches that I came from were not less than any other church. And so, if anything, us going to seminary was a part of us helping to fulfill the lack that those seminaries had. And But now that I look back and I think about the dynamics of Christianity in America, there's a sociologist at the University of Chicago. His name is Stephen Warner, and he says that uh, immigration is not the de-Christianization of America. Immigration is the de-Europeanization of American Christianity. And
Mm.
like, I now am understanding that more.
Mhm.
So there's almost a dignity that's kind of being reinfused into my faith because of that dynamic, which is numerically, if you just look at statistics, without immigrant populations and people of color at large, evangelical Christianity in America would be experiencing a steep decline, very similar
Yeah.
to mainline Christianity. And this is probably a lot more than what your listeners are bargaining for. But
No, well, this is what I'm interested in. So hopefully they're coming along for the ride. So continue.
there's something about what God is doing, by bringing the nations here. It used to be that like people would say, "Oh, the nations are here so that we would reach them," and that's not untrue. Largely, though, that was usually what white people meant when people from other countries were coming here.
Right.
But there's a sense in which like the nations are coming here to reach North Americans as
Right.
well.
Right.
That's been my experience, to me, it's almost full circle, and that's what makes America unique. And again, our book and me in general, like our work isn't to like be down on America. I think there's a lot of beauty that's found in America, and one of those things is that it is one of the most diverse church
Yeah.
bodies that you'll find in anywhere in the world. So.
Hey, you guys, Cleo and I just wanted to interrupt this episode for a brief moment to let you know a little bit about the sponsor of the episode. That's right, it is Freedom Story Media. Freedom Story Media is all about telling your story. We know that it matters, and we want to help you tell it and achieve your goals. Freedom Story Media creates compelling videos, websites, and graphics so that you can experience freedom in life and in business. So why don't you go ahead and check it out? We can do videos for your website, for your company. We can build a website for your company. If you need a new logo or graphics, maybe it's even something small like a slideshow presentation for a wedding that maybe you're helping put together. If you got a media project, whether big or small, we'd love to help you out. Go to freedomstorymedia.com and find out more. Now, let's get you back to today's episode. Say bye, Cleo. And that's one of the things that I really loved about the book, is I think as I'm reading it, like one of the themes that I just keep hearing is trying to continue to shine a light on the diverse beauty that is the church, and encouraging it to not be so homogenized. And there's even a chapter called the decentering of the white American church, where it's like let's not make it like this the only representation of what it means to be the church. And I love how you guys continue to point to just the global church and all the different ways as you go through the kingdom of God, the image of God, the word of God, the mission of God, in which the global church has a voice, has something to say, to share, to impart to the American church, that without like there's a deficit that the church doesn't even realize that it has. And that's I asked that other question that was quite personal, honestly, because as I was reading that hit me, because that was very much my own experience as well. And I just wanted to ask you first before I even just shared mine. But I know coming up in the Black church, that was what I knew of Christianity. And then I went and strayed far. But as I got saved, all I knew was that. So I went back to that. But quickly, soon after that, I was trying to grow and learn. And so the first thing that popped into my mind was like, so now I need to like get something that's outside of this, that's quote unquote better than this, to grow. And that then turned me into the different white evangelical arenas. And I think there's, at least for me, in the past handful of years, I've been navigating the unpacking of the elevation of what it means to be white in my mind, and the diminishment of what it means to not be like anything else. And like that was just real waters that were just baked into my journey. And it wasn't like there was any individual that was like teaching me that. That was just kind of like the unintended message that I was getting in the world. So kind of even like the best of our community, guess what they did? They made sure they got out of the community, and then we're trying to navigate in the white spaces because they've made it. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So all of those things, I think, ended up, playing a role in the condescension that we would have when we look back. And like and yet that's the foundation. All of the things that I'm now in the season of like remembering and returning to, it's like, man, these were all the things that my whole journey early on was trying to teach me, and I was running from pursuing these other things. And there's so much value in my time in the white evangelical church. But like, I think one of the things that and then I'm gonna stop testifying and I'm gonna let you talk. one of the things that it took me a handful of years to realize was that as I was calling myself learning, the best of theological understandings, I was also learning American Christianity, and I didn't realize there was this cultural thing baked into what I was learning. So when that, not just the theology came up against other theology, but when that culture came up against other culture, in the same way that I was calling this theology wrong, I was calling this other cultural understanding wrong. And when I know that's baked into me, there's like a broken identity thing that's happening there, where it's like you're kind of like self-rejecting and like you know what I mean? Like so I've been spending the past few years in this journey right now, just trying to reclaim who I am, and culturally speaking, I know who I am in Christ and the absolute foundation in Him, but like the elements of me as a Black American and what that looks like and what that means. And so I love, as I've been engaging with you on social media, as I read this in the book, there's so much about how you do life that is so deeply, richly rooted in theological truth and understanding, and 100% like wrapped in you being among American. You know what I mean? And like I love that you aren't walking a journey where you feel like you need to choose one or the other, if that even makes any sense. So I know
Yeah.
there's no question there,
Yeah.
but
Well, I appreciate that you make that observation, because I think there is tension inside of me, and part of it is like, so if I were to ask myself, could I go back to a predominantly Hmong church or Hmong
mm,
space? The answer is yeah, probably yes. There's no animus, like,
right.
but there's also a very real sense in which, like, I know. Yeah, I use the term oftentimes, communitas, and that was a term that a guy, Alan Hirsch, really introduced to many of us. And there was this idea of having to go outside the tribe to experience something, so that
Mm,
one day you might bring it back in. And
yeah.
that's a dynamic that I feel. I feel like I'm a
Mm,
part of this diaspora community of the Hmong American Church, and I hope and pray that the things that I learn can be useful to all people, but especially my own people. And
yeah.
so and I feel okay with that. I feel okay with that, and that's one thing that I've been saying to my own children, because they're now third generation American born Hmong people. They don't
Hmm.
speak the language. They understand very little of it. Um, they eat Hmong food, but I mean, so are they less Hmong than my parents? And the question is
Mm,
no. They're not.
right.
There is a sense of autonomy and agency that each one of us, we get to choose collectively in our generation, but also individually as an individual. What it means to be a Hmong person, what it means to be an African American.
Yeah.
And so the terms that sociologists will use sometimes is, this is micro ethnicity. We get
Hmm.
to choose what it means to be Hmong, and my kids' generation collectively will choose, and it's not going to be defined by a certain dress or even language per se, but it'll
Yeah.
be traditions and affinity and family, and so and this past year we saw Suni Lee win a gold medal at the Olympics. Suni
Yeah.
Lee is a Hmong American gal out of St. Paul, Minnesota, and she represented America, but she also represented Hmong people, and that was incredible for us. There's only
Mhm.
300,000 Hmong people in the United States, and so
Wow.
we're a very small number, and so we take pride in those kinds of things. And so for us, like that, that currently is what it means to be Hmong, and
Yeah.
not so much a dress or even language. And so I appreciate you sharing your story, because I think a
Mm,
lot of what I'm hearing you say, I've learned so much from the African American experience as well.
mm,
And I realize that there's a lot in which the black white dynamic, many of us came into as immigrants, and we had to kind of learn the dynamics of America. And for African Americans, there was a huge learning curve that softened, the entry into American life for a lot
mm.
of us other minority groups. So
Right, right. Yeah, I'm grateful for all of my answers, man. I look back and I when I have moments of feeling frustrated at the current cultural context I'm in, all it takes is a conversation with my mom, my dad, one of my
mm,
grandparents in those days, and I'm like, okay, you know
mhm,
what? I'm fine. Like we'll be
mm,
okay. Like
yeah,
not only do I have the same God that my grandmother had, but I have um way more support. Live such a much more blessed life. Like so, I love that we can continue to open doors and make ways for folks generation. And I love and I'm moving so fast in all the thoughts that I have to ask you, but I love your emphasis on the next generation. I see with the community that you presently lead. So maybe we'll transition a little bit to the conversation in regards to the Prodigal Network. But I'm going
mhm,
to ask you a question that I believe may cue that up. It might take us somewhere else, but I have to ask it. So we shared a stage at the microchurch conference. I guess that was last year or earlier this year. I don't even know. Time flies.
yeah,
And
yeah,
you shared man, a powerful, impactful message. But you talked about a specific day that shifted things for you, January 6th, 2021. Can you talk about like the impact of that day on maybe even the work of this book, and maybe even the development of the Prodigal Network, or if that was already in the brewing? So
Yeah, we were Eric and Matt and myself. We were right in the middle of editing our first draft of the manuscript when the January 6th, people call it the insurrection, Capitol riots. When that happened, and our text thread between the three of us just blew up. And I remember sitting in my office trying to write, but then just I've got CNN on, and I'm like, what am I looking at? What are we watching? Is this real? Like I'm thinking, okay, we're not in the 18th century, American Revolution, Civil War.
right.
Like we're in 2021, and I just remember texting back and forth between Eric and Matt. And then all of a sudden you see, the flags of Jesus Saves going across the screen, and people are in the Capitol Rotunda, praying in the name of Jesus to overturn the election. And I'm just so confused. And then there is a couple of other Twitter or social media videos that came out, and you see all these people lined up outside praying, some speaking in tongues, some worshiping like full on. Just a couple of days before, there was I think it was called the Jericho March or something like that. And I was so confused, man. I was really confused because I thought in my mind I was able to sort between what is Christian nationalism and what is evangelicalism and American Christianity. And I thought in my head that, like, for the most part, those, I can spot.
You could see the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I could spot the difference. But then when I was watching this, I was like, no, like,
Yeah.
this is the same stream, because these would have been people that probably I would have went to the same worship concerts. So that was confusing for me. And then there was social media just makes things worse because you see people, from all sides. And so it was a very confusing time. And I thought that's when I began asking myself, I'm like, what are we a part of? Like, like, I know I'm a Christian. I know I follow Jesus. I know I believe the Bible, but what is all this other extra stuff, And, I would say in retrospect, that was healthy questioning. But in the midst of that, I do think that if there was ever a time where I was like, man, I think I might be like leaving American Christianity or evangelicalism or whatever, like that would have been it. And I've got so many good friends, and we're having this discussion, and they feel the same way. And I'm just like, okay, I got to remember, like, this thing is broad. And as we continue to work on the book and to connect it to the Prodigal Network, I had to really ask myself, like, what is my local community? Like, who are we? Because that local narrative of who we are and what we're called to do and what we're trying to do in our little small sphere of influence, in my mind, should be much larger than this craziness that we were watching on TV.
Yeah.
And we had a series of conversations in our church plant, the Prodigal Network, to try to bring some focus to what does it mean for us to be, kingdom-rooted people that are, in a sense, in exile, and that we are for our nation and we are for our city, but we're not going to be confined to those identities, because our identity first and foremost is to Jesus and the kingdom.
Amen. So during those conversations, just fill in the timeline a little bit. had you guys already launched or whatever the beginning of your plant of the Prodigal Network? Had that already been going, and or were you? Well, yeah, I'll let you share. Yeah.
Yeah, we had already been meeting for, mind you, we're in the middle of the pandemic, so meeting often means
Right.
Zoom calls, and but we started our first missional community June of 2020, so it would have been
Oh, okay.
about 6 months before the insurrection. And so it was post George Floyd, so it was the
Right.
convergence of the pandemic, George Floyd, that really birthed, the Prodigal Network. And then we were pushing into the winter, and just knowing the election was coming. I mean, that was just
Mhm.
everything was supercharged with the election.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then probably, in addition to that, what was really I would say a huge trigger for our community that really solidified our identity was the um, the shootings in Atlanta that
Mm,
killed several people, but among them 5 Asian women. And
yeah.
I think that for our community really shook us up, because the anti-Asian hate during the pandemic was already something that I just don't think people were giving enough attention to. Like, I
Mm,
remember early on in the pandemic, like, my wife felt uncomfortable going grocery shopping because she didn't want to be
mm,
called, a name or something. And so so the shootings that happened, would have been April 2021, just seemed to validate everybody's fears, that,
right.
and as much as people were trying to say, hey, this was not a racist act, there was actually a sexual deviant, those kinds of things. And that, which brought greater frustration. But I think what it forced our community to do was say, hey, we're a predominantly Asian community, Hmong, Korean, Chinese, Indonesian, Cambodian, others. And it's good for us to name our community as predominantly Asian
Mhm.
American. We're Pan Asian. We're multi ethnic. All right, so there's no one version of multi ethnic. Um, but it's also good that we're Asian. And I remember having a prayer night, and specifically for our women, our sisters in our group, because they were very shaken up by it. And it was just so healthy and healing, and we got to pray
Mhm.
for especially our Korean friends and Chinese friends who could identify with the names of those who were shot and killed. We got to pray and participate in rallies, vigils. And so, that there is so much. I mean, Armand, I mean, I know we're only like a year and a half removed from but man, if you think back to like 2 years ago, man, we
Yeah.
went through so much. I mean,
We packed so much life in just a little
oh my
bit.
goodness, man.
Yeah.
I mean, we went all of us,
Yeah.
we went
Yeah.
through so much. And I'm not convinced, people are talking about like the pandemic hangover or the COVID hangover is going to be 3 years or something like that.
Huh.
I think it's probably going to be at least 3 years before
Yeah.
we really understand how traumatic, not just COVID, but the social and the
Everything.
political and the
Yeah.
rate, all that stuff. Like, I think
Yeah.
we'll know 3 years from now more.
Oh my gosh, the history books are going to be quite interesting in the
Mm,
decades to come when they look at this
mhm,
season.
mhm.
Well, we didn't really get into too much about the Prodigal Network. I mean, we mentioned it, but why don't you quickly before we run out of time here? I know we're about over. What is the Prodigal Network? And like what are you guys doing right now? And I don't know, how's God using you guys?
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, we're a church of missional communities, and what that means is that our predominant expression of church happens in smaller units called missional communities. And so we have some in the western suburbs and close to the city, and all, Chicagoland. And I mean, a big part of it is we're still trying to figure a lot of this stuff out. We meet monthly for a corporate gathering and for envisioning and training and equipping But most of our missional engagement in our communities happens throughout the week in our missional
Mhm.
communities. And we've been trying to maintain, what does it look like to be multi-ethnic, but also live into our Asian American identities. And so that's
Mhm.
been a dynamic. And then also, I don't know how you feel with the work that you all are doing, but for us, what we've learned over the last, year and a half is like we've learned to be an agile church. And so, um, which is hard for some people because some people need structure and we all need structure. So it's like, yeah, we need more structure. But I think like things are very unpredictable. I think we have a strategy, we have a vision, but we also are a high agility. And so we're in a season of tremendous prayer, of tremendous like listening, a posture of listening. We came out of a summer, 6 weeks of leadership sabbatical, where we said
Mhm.
we're just going to spend most of our time praying. And so, because we have the energy, but we don't want to just expend energy on
Mhm.
strategies just for the sake of strategy. And so, and that's forced us to be much more of a slower, like slow
Mhm.
moving. And to be honest with you, because it's a labor of love, we're all co-vocational, meaning like nobody gets paid for what we're doing.
Yep.
It's been great, and to see people really live into their missional call has been really exciting. And
Mhm.
then to see people who really, I mean, this has been probably the sweetest, but also the hardest, is those who have completely written off the church, begin to experience community for the first time
Yeah.
has been really cool. So yeah, it's been really
That
sweet.
that's my favorite thing, I think, about the way that, we're allowed to do ministry these days is that, there's well, our gatherings, and I don't know if that would you would speak for this too, but most of our gatherings wouldn't be something that would really appeal to people who would really be into, the bigger
Sure.
kind of more, I don't know, whatever else you would describe
Yeah.
those forms of church. Um, and the ones that do show up are a lot of those who are like, normally church wouldn't be a thing for me, or
Hmm.
I remembered this season that I had where I was so tight with people in, church community, and this reminds me of that. And like all of those things that are really like refreshing to so many people that, I think their experiences of church were really starting to feel dead, and
Yeah.
not having that vibrant life that, I think really is characteristic of, really the Lord working and moving through the community that they're in. And not that the community's dead, but like it just was not connecting for them,
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things about what we get to do. Now I know you guys, I'm just gonna real quick bring up your website and point folks there. If you guys want to know a bit more about Prodigal Network, you guys can check them out at theprodigal.net. They got a nice little video on here that kind of gives you some of the origin story, which we didn't really get to dive into too much. So I want to point you guys there to check it out, as well as to try to connect and maybe take some next steps with them, like maybe getting involved financially or showing up to some events if they have some of those going on. Um, as far as them being able to connect with you, Daniel, are there any places online that you would point them if they want to? Maybe if they want to shoot you an NT Wright style email,
Oh
or
yeah, right. Yeah. Well, if you wanted to email us at prodigal.net at Gmail. I know that's kind of
okay,
confusing, but the prodigal.net at gmail.com, that'll go to our leadership team. If you wanted to look me up on socials, Instagram, Twitter, it would be KOOB as in boy XWM. KOBXWM. That's my Hmong name.
I was gonna ask you. I'm glad you said that because I've seen it and I was like, I don't know what this means. Is this like an abbreviation for something?
Yeah,
How do you
you got it.
pronounce that?
It's pronounced Gong Su. Gong Su.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I will totally mangle it, and my daughter will watch this and cancel me because
That's funny.
But man, are there any final things that you want to share? Well, first of all, you guys get the book, get the book. Super rich. There's so many places in this book which we didn't really get into a ton, but I think will be an encouraging thing for people who right now maybe have been struggling with forms of church or the way they've experienced church. Like this, I think will remind people that the church in itself is doing fine. The global church, is it's still God's church.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a reform that I believe that the Lord is bringing. And one of the things I love about this is it's reminding us that some of that is coming through those who have not been centered. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about this or places where you would point them where they can go get it.
Yeah, you can get it at most, book retail outlets. But I'd say the last thing I'd want to say is, whether it's the book or the forms of church that we've talked about here, I think the one thing that remains true for all groups, all Christians, all race, all ethnicities, all forms of church is that, at the end of the day, I mean, discipleship is really learning to hear the voice of Jesus and to obey him. So that we might be more like him. And I would say that that's the commonality that we have across the board as followers of Jesus. And for those who aren't yet followers of Jesus, I would say, the church is diverse and there's all kinds of churches for all kinds of people. But the main thing that I would challenge everybody is to really ask the question, can I know Jesus? And if I do, then what would it mean to have a life with him? And, that's really at the heart of everything that we do. And I know that's at the heart of what you do, man. So I appreciate you.
And we appreciate you so much. So many rich things in this conversation and so many questions that I have that I was going to ask you that we don't have time to. So maybe we'll make time at a future date to have some more conversation.
Right on. Would love that.
This has been such a blessing. So we want to thank you so much for being on the show, being on the podcast. For those of you that are watching and listening, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe so you can catch the next episode. We're going to have some more amazing conversations like we did with our brother Daniel here. And make sure you share this with some folks that you think this might be a blessing to, and go get the book. And we'll see you guys back here on the next episode. Be blessed and be a blessing. Peace.